Welcome back to another episode here of Talking Ball, and we're going to be previewing the Duke exhibition game against Lincoln from Pennsylvania. It's going to be this coming Saturday, which I believe is October 19th. I may have the... That's right. Yep. And it's going to be at 1 p.m., and it's going to be the first time we get to see Duke play against, somebody else rather than the scrimmage against themselves. But before we get into the game, I think it's important spend a minute here. Let's talk about the news, JD. The Boozer boys are coming to Duke.
The biggest non-surprise that I've ever heard in college basketball, that Carlos Boozer's sons are going to go to Duke. I mean, I'm glad they scheduled visits to other places, but this is exciting. Jack, when do they come? Is it next year?
Next year, yep.
Oh my goodness. Cooper Flagg, the Boozer twins. This is just, if you're a Duke fan, this just gets better.
Yeah, and I think it may say something about Cooper Flagg, the fact that, he reclassified. He was supposed to be in the same class as the Boozer twins, and he's 17 still. I think he turns 18 in December. But yeah, this is, how exciting is it to have those two guys coming to Duke next season, just to keep as you're alluding to, like the momentum going with the program. Two great players, two guys who are going to be big impact at Duke and continue the legacy of Boozer. And the one thing that got me thinking was, I'm pretty sure these are going to be the first brothers to play together at Duke since the Plumlees, and the Plumlees were a ton of fun. So I think it'll be great to have a couple of Boozers.
I think you got that right. Although, how many? 3 Plumlees by the time we were done, right?
3 Plumlees by the time we were done. I think only 2 were on the team at the same time.
Yes.
So I don't think Mason and Miles shared the court a little bit together, but I don't think Mason and Marshall ever did.
Jack, what makes the Boozer twins so exciting?
I wish I could tell you a little bit more. I don't, we don't watch a ton of high school basketball, so it's hard to say. I know it's Caden and Cameron, I believe, and one, the bigger one, who's like 6'9", I believe is Caden. Could have that wrong. If I'm wrong, let me know in the comments below. I apologize. But he's ranked like in the top 3, with AJ DeBonsa as the number 1 player in the class. And it seems like he can do pretty much everything. The one thing that it seemed like statistically he was really, really dominant at was rebounding. He seems to get 12, 13 rebounds a game at around 6'9". And the other Boozer is not ranked quite as high. I think he's around 20, 25 in the class. He's a point guard, so you get that nice, synergy between your point guard and your power forward, who have, maybe a little bit more of a connection than others might typically.
So this is your I'm not prepared answer. Not bad.
Yeah, well, listen, I'm not going to pretend. I'm not watching a ton of high school basketball. College, pros, we'll watch some high school games, but yeah. All right, with that, let's move into this game that's coming up here, the Duke exhibition game against Lincoln. Before we get into, the Duke, what some thoughts we have about Duke heading into that game, I think, we should talk a little about Lincoln. The program. I know you've got some stuff, JD, you want to touch on. Quickly, just set the stage here. Lincoln is a Division II program. Do you know what their name is, like their mascot name?
They are the Lions.
Oh, okay. All right. You were prepared. They went 7.
And they are the nation's first degree-granting HSBC.
There you go. All right, you've got some real history. I just want to get into the record. I'll let you go in a second here. So they went 17-14 last year, 13-7 in their conference, and they have a new head coach, Julius Hodge.
Very important.
Very important.
Get back to that.
Yeah.
A lot of Duke history with Julius Hodge.
Yes. And Did you see how many coaches? What number coach is he in Lincoln history?
You got me there.
You want to guess, or do you want me to tell you?
I think you should just give us the number.
He's the 24th coach in Lincoln, Pennsylvania program history. And I'm sure you're about to get into, with his pedigree, I think he could be the one to really make the program take a leap.
Well, if you notice, and the roster, they do a heavy amount of recruiting since they're in Pennsylvania out of New York and New Jersey, in particular, Newark, and some of the other strong history black communities within New York City, which had a tradition of basketball. So I actually think, while there's no one on their team over 6'9", they're going through their roster, Jack, it reminded me of looking at a really good schoolyard team from New York and New Jersey, and I wouldn't be surprised if they, aside from the height issue where they can't match up, I wouldn't be surprised if they actually play really aggressive and they think it's their chance to, beat two. Now, maybe that's going to work for the first half, but it actually may be an interesting scrimmage.
I was thinking more like the first 5 to 10 minutes, but yeah, if you want to stretch it to the first half, go right ahead. It was interesting you caught that too. Looking at the height of the roster, I was actually kind of surprised they had, two guys who are 6'9", two guys who are 6'8". They got somebody who's 6'7". And while this year's Duke team is tall in terms of, especially the guards, outside of Malawak, there's no one really over 6'9". Because Ngangba's out, right? We're assuming Ngangba's not going to play. We don't know. We have no idea.
Well, Jack, it's a good time for us as Duke fanatics to bring up the fact that Duke may closely guard the status of their players and their respective injuries, as well as the Kremlin.
Yeah, nobody knows what's going on over there. The only reason we even found out Ngangba wasn't going to play in the Countdown to Craziness was because in some of the preview, the footage they released on YouTube, you could see him in the background in a walking boot. There wasn't an announcement or anything. At least that's how I found out. And so with that being said, outside of Kama Malawak, who's certainly a bit taller than 6'9", they match up decently well height-wise in the mid, their forwards, right? But I am curious how their guards, because they are a little bit smaller in guards, how most guards typically are, 6'1", 6'2", 6 foot, how they're going to do against the taller Duke guards and wings who are 6'5", 6'6". And that's going to be where I think the height difference is really showcased outside of the obvious Kama Malawak.
Well, what I'm looking for here is, if I'm right, and that this is an aggressive young team put together from Newark and New York, this is a really good first test to see how the guards play against potentially pressure. And I know eventually we're going to talk about who Julius Hodge is and his pedigree and how it relates to Duke. But I think this is, you might sort of scratch your head and go, they're playing Lincoln. Who cares? I'm actually, pretty excited to see a couple of things here. So.
Yeah, and I'll turn it to you to talk about Julius Hodge. Just 1 second. I think it's important to mention just a couple of names from Lincoln. So, Bakir Cleveland, Freddie Young, Reggie Hudson, those are guys who were among their leading scorers from last season. And Freddie Young in particular, looking at the stats, stood out to me as a really good shooter. He shot just about 40% from three, and he made 3+ attempts per game, which at the college level is elite shooting. I know it's D2, but I think really the difference between D2 and D1 isn't necessarily the guards typically, but it's the bigs and the size of your bigs and how skilled they are. And so I think, to your point, like, their guards are going to be able to compete, but I am interested how they're going to do matching up with, playing against guys who have 4 or 5 inches of height and, long wingspans, etc. So I'm curious how that's going to go. But I think, like I said, before we get to Duke, let's, you want to talk about Mr. Hodge, so go right ahead.
So when I saw the name, he was just named their coach in August of 2024. And if you're a crazy Duke fan like we are, Julius Hodge, and you had to think about it a minute, and then you got to go back to 2005 when he was NC State's two-time All-American. In 2004, he was the Player of the Year in the ACC, which meant that for the purpose of being a Duke historian here, there's a history of matchups. So let's go to January 13th, 2005, which was the only regular season matchup between Duke and NC State. And Duke won the game. Sheldon Williams, 22, Daniel Ewing, 17, and one of our fan favorites, J.J. Redick, did not show up that day. He had 8 points, 7 rebounds, though he was averaging 21.5 that year. But here's a couple of quotes that sort of just adds color. Coach K said of the game, which they won handily, "I love my team. They're fun. They're not Leitner and Brand, but they make plays." So Julius Hodge in that game had 13 points and 5 turnovers. However, they met again in the ACC tournament. And this is where Redick was vintage Redick. He had 7 3-pointers, finished with 35 points. But Hodge did not show again. He had 11 points on 4 for 11, and it was a Duke team that went on to win the ACC that year, but lost to Michigan State in the Elite Eight, 78-68. And there's a little Duke history for you.
And with that, I think it's appropriate to turn to the current team and just, what we're looking for in this matchup against Lincoln. And for me, the number one thing that I'm looking forward to in this game is I expect Cooper Flagg to play to improve. I thought he looked, decent in the scrimmage. But just from everything we've heard about Cooper Flagg, I feel like the countdown to craziness, an inter-squad scrimmage in front of fans is not like his cup of tea. I feel like he's the kind of guy who lives for like the bigger moments. He likes really competing against somebody else. And while he certainly enjoys competing against his teammates, I think him going up against another team is going to allow him his competitiveness to take it up to another level.
I think for me, I did a little more background on Con Canoopel, and I'm going to have to adopt his own nickname, which is what John Shire calls him, K2. And
that's what his family calls him, Con 2.
And as I listened to the podcast with Foster, he's the oldest of 5 brothers. So they have wherever they go, they have a team. All the brothers are playing, but they already have their 5. They can go anywhere they want. But he grew up as a Wisconsin fan.
He's from the area.
Was rooting for Wisconsin when Grayson, in his freshman year, had that final 5 minutes to give us the championship, which was just great. So I want to go back to something I said where I thought that if Foster can't carry the team at point guard, that there's a chance. And in listening to it, the chance that K2 would do it. And he, though, sees himself purely, really as a shooter. And I mean, he could. It would be interesting to see if he could bring the ball up because he could look over the defense. Really interesting. So I'm still looking to see if that ever emerges.
No, I agree. I think, as I told you, from one of the few high school players I've watched was Con Canoopel, of all people. And from watching him, I told you over the summer that I thought his passing ability was underrated. And I think, we both thought that stood out in the scrimmage. And so the one thing I have to turn back to you is you are laser focused on, can Caleb Foster be the point guard? And this is the second time we've talked about it. And both times you've not mentioned Tyrese Proctor. He's also, a point guard who has really good vision and can find other people. So I don't think, I feel like, are you putting too much on Foster and not giving Proctor, enough credit here as a guy who can certainly be a table setter?
Look, I think that's a reasonable observation, and I think it just comes from seeing them listed as the backcourt, because they have experience compared to a lot of freshmen, and the guys that they brought in are not guards.
Mm-hmm.
So I just have to hope, and they both had injuries last year, so I have to hope that either you're right, and it's a situation where either one could be the point guard, or who else could possibly be there, and that's why I keep focusing on K2. But I hope we never have to get there.
Well, yeah, I think there could be, moments if one of the two, especially if one of the two misses a game or a couple of games, where you have to have somebody there. And I think Con Canoopel is like that third, if you will, the third string point guard, right, on the depth chart. And I think there'll be a lot of minutes with Proctor and Foster together. But I also think it's going to be important to stagger them, so you always have, one of your point guards on the court, just to keep everybody composed. And to your point, those guys have experience at Duke. They know what Coach Shire is looking for. Obviously, Proctor's been with Coach Shire the entirety of Coach Shire's tenure as the head coach. And so he really knows what Shire wants them to do. Foster, obviously coming into his second season, on the podcast, he's really talked about how, him missing the games at the end of last season really helped him to grow, to see the game a little bit better. And, a lot of players have talked about how that helps them when they're just able to kind of see how the game flows. They can also see what the coaches are seeing, right? And maybe some things start to click for them. And I think, I might be, the biggest Caleb Foster guy. I'm like driving the train, the Caleb Foster bandwagon. But I really just think he's going to be really good this year. And one, funny note is, I don't know if you noticed, but he's got a little bit of a different style this year. He's got the headband. He's got the cutoff shirt underneath. And he's mentioned, because, he's hosting the podcast, so we've heard a lot from him this summer. And he's mentioned his favorite player is Devin Booker. And if you guys don't know, Devin Booker, he's got the headband. He's got the cutoff shirt underneath. So I think that's a great guy to model your game after.
I think we're going to have, for an early season scrimmage where even most Duke fans wouldn't be paying attention, I think we're going to be able to continue to learn more about what this current team looks like.
I agree. And the last thing I want to touch on is, who do you think is going to start? And do you think, I think everyone's going to get minutes, but do you think Coach Shire is going to try to distribute them like evenly? Or are we going to start to see, a little bit of him revealing his cards, right? So do we see, Foster, Proctor, Flag, 25 to 28 minutes, and then maybe some other guys, 10 to 12. What do you think we're going to be looking at here?
So having watched Duke for 40-something years, I go back to their Final Four appearance in 1978. So that's 46 years. The one thing we know is that in the preseason, it's the whittling down. It's sort of like a rival when the games counted. Who is the starting five? And it is that opportunity to test the strengths and weaknesses of the entire roster. So I'm not quite certain how much we'll learn just yet. I'm of the opinion this is a scrimmage. He'll want to get as many players some minutes, and not yet, especially against the D2 team. There's that upcoming scrimmage with
Mr.
ASU.
Hurley. Yep, Arizona State, yep. Bobby Hurley.
Right. So I think at that point, to your observation, yes, we will quickly see who he has in mind for his starting five. So that's my opinion.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I think you're spot on. I think this is going to be an opportunity for Coach Shire to mix and match, try out some things, see, maybe try out some lineups that maybe he hasn't even tried in practice, right? Like, this is a good opportunity to be experimental. But then I think that while it is a scrimmage, I think that Arizona State game is exhibition, is going to be one where, I think they're going to try to win. And it's going to be, apparently it's going to be televised, and they're selling the tickets, I think, for charity. So I think they're going to be playing hard and trying to win. So I think you're spot on that we'll see a little bit more, what are the lineups going to be? Who's going to get real playing time? All that stuff I think will be more appropriately answered, or at least we'll get more answers, not all the answers, in that Arizona State game.
Well, and speaking of scrimmages, you have some pretty interesting news, if you want to mention to your Talking Ball audience, about where you'll be on October 30th.
That's right. We'll be heading down I'll be heading down for the Duke is having an open practice on October 30th that I'll be there for. And we'll be able to get a little bit of an inside look. So after that, be on the lookout before we get to the opener on November 4th. We'll have a little special but a little special edition episode where we'll talk about some of the insights I got from the open practice. So be on the lookout for that. Yeah,
and just to be clear, you were able to, you and I were able to get tickets. I will try to make it as well. This is you have to buy a ticket for the practice. You can't just show up there. Wouldn't want your listeners to say, hey, this is great, I can go there. But no, you do have to buy a ticket for it.
Yeah, so, all right. With that, we'll be back after the Lincoln scrimmage to give you guys our reaction. And I think it'll be a lot of fun. I think it'll be a lot of fun to see them take on another team. And it's the we're getting there. We're closing in on that November 4th game, the start of the season against Maine. So only a couple weeks away, and about 1 week until the scrimmage. So very excited. All right, and with that, if you guys are new, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, all that great YouTube stuff. It helps us grow. Share it with a friend, and we'll see you guys next time. Peace. All right.